Hello there, Alessandra.
Have you here? I'm so
Thank
sorry
you.
for the technical problems, but sometimes these things happens. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for receiving our invitation and to being with us here today. It is a great honor to have you here. I was graduated about 20 years ago, and it was we didn't have any good literature here in Brazil, so we rely completely on the literature from abroad. And your book was one of the best. It was beside my bed all the time because I was reading all of it. And great honor, great pleasure to be here talking to you today. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, let's start our talk. I have some questions here. And you feel free to talk as much as you want about these questions, and we will be receiving questions on live too. Okay? We would like to know, first of all, how was your start as an exotic veterinarian? Did you leave the university and open the clinic straight away? Did you attend dogs and cats as well, and afterwards you start working with wild animals? How was the start for you?
You pretty much outlined exactly what happened. I had graduated thinking I would probably be I'm going to have to take my earphones out because I won't be able to hear you. All right. Anyway, I'm getting a double voice.
Oh.
That's okay. Anyway.
My phone away, maybe.
When I graduated, I thought I would probably be a dog and cat ophthalmologist. Oh. And that didn't work out. So I started in small animal practice, and I was the only person that would see exotics, although I didn't know what I was doing. Then I joined the the American Association of Zoos, Parks, and Aquariums, the Zoo Veterinarian Group. And after going to meetings there, I started doing more and more bird work. And the next thing you know, we weren't getting enough education. So I said to a couple other people, let's start the Association of Avian Veterinarians. And that's how it started.
Oh, that's nice. And when you opened your clinic, did you attend dogs and cats as well?
Yes.
Oh, that's nice. And then in what point did you realize that you should only attend birds?
Well, I wasn't keeping up with the dog and cat medicine, and my bird practice was growing, so I added a young veterinarian to do the dogs and cats. And then I just did pure birds from that point on.
How many years?
Oh, wow. Probably since 75, 78.
Great. A lot of time.
Yes.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And yours was the first clinic that attended birds in USA? That's correct?
Well, there were other clinics that saw a lot of birds, like Dr. Bob Altman and Dr. Ted Lefebvre and several others. But I was the first one, I guess, to open an exclusive bird practice.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Great start. Let's go on. So let's talk about the birds now. What do you think about keeping a bird as a pet? Do you encourage your clients to do so? Are there birds that you don't recommend people to have? What do you think about that?
Well, I've changed my opinion quite a bit. Originally, when I started doing endoscopic surgery of birds, I started getting paid by giving me birds to do endoscopy. So I at one point had 200 pairs of birds. 200. And it just got out of control. And then after I realized we didn't know how to feed them, we didn't have a lot of basic science. So I had to, I'm going to have to take this out. How does that work? I won't be able to hear you without putting it back in. But anyway, the point was that I went to the zoo vets and we had to have an organization. So and as far as what birds do I recommend, I don't think we should have any of the large birds like the macaws and the cockatoos. We have them, we should take good care of them, but we shouldn't breed anymore and we shouldn't import anymore. And maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but the destruction of the habitat for those birds is a major consideration. And I sent you a link about COVID-19 and how that's being linked to the decimation of our wild habitats. So if I was going to recommend a pet bird, I think a budgie's a great, budgerigar is a great bird. They talk, they have the world record talking. Cockatiels are okay. Some of the other, maybe other small birds, but people love finches, they love canaries. In the United States right now, one of the most popular growing avian birds is the chicken, and also the little white dove. They don't bite, they don't scream, they love to sit on your shoulder and be your friend. So I think we need to get away from the big parrots.
Yeah, that's for sure. What is your point of view about trimming the wings of the birds?
Okay, I sent you a link about this, but I'm going to show you just a quick, well, I didn't do it. Anyway, Dr. Todd Trigger's link. I'm sorry?
We will put all the links here for the people can access them. Yeah.
What Todd Trigger does is he takes off this bottom edge of the feather and leaves the top edge. And what that does is it takes away the drive power of the wings. So they kind of glide to the ground rather than crash to the ground with this technique. So I think not trimming birds is the ideal way to do it, but it's pretty hard to do that in the average house.
Sometimes people have to have a house that the bird can fly all around and close windows and things like that. And sometimes it's a very hard thing to do.
Yes, one of the new techniques to introduce a bird into a house is to take painter's tape and put it on mirrors and put it on the windows so the bird sees that that's not a clear thing to fly through. But there's a lot more things in the house than just windows and mirrors. There's boiling water, there's lots of other things. So it's a challenge to fly a bird in the house, and I don't know that they get enough exercise. We're really seeing an outrageous number of atherosclerotic lesions in birds from cockatiels all the way up, and exercise has to have a role in that. So how do you give a bird enough exercise to match flying 35 miles a day? So you either get a free flying lesson, which is very difficult, and a lot of birds don't make it. They get eaten by raptors. And then the other issue is you can get a harness now and put a little clip on it and run it down a line so that the bird can fly maybe 10 yards, 100 yards, however long the line is. That's another way to get more exercise. But that's a real challenge, and why we shouldn't have big birds again. And Laura Kim Joyner says her philosophy is there's no cage big enough for a big bird.
Never is a cage good enough. And inside the house, the small birds, sometimes can we teach them to fly all around, or it's a difficult thing to do? The small ones, because the big ones we have to go outside to train them and to do free flight and things like that. But do you have any experience with that, with teaching the birds to fly inside the house or something like that?
Yes, Patricia Anderson, who did a chat with us, has a lot of videos on Facebook and different places on how to get birds to fly inside. And basically she starts by putting the birds in a cage as little babies. And if they want to come out, they come out and they get on a perch that's on the door of the cage. And then she does this targeting, which I'm not real familiar with, but anybody that's studying behavior learns about targeting. And she'll take this little red ball and she'll tap a perch outside the front of the cage. And if the bird's not flying yet, then she'll put her hand there so the bird can step up. She'll hit it with her target. And then finally, she'll teach it to fly from the cage to a perch. And then you can see her teaching the bird to fly different places in the house. That's a nice educational piece.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That this is something for us to consider as veterinarians, to teach the owners how to do that and how to exercise our birds, because living in a cage is not the right thing to do, for sure.
And that was one of the big mistakes I made when I first started my practice or actually it was a mistake, was the way my practice grew is we spent so much time educating people about, first of all, choosing a bird. How do you know you're getting a good bird? Even a cockatiel, you can choose a bright yellow cockatiel. It's going to die of liver disease by 5 or 6 years. So there's a lot of education. And once you teach those people that, they become loyal clients. And then I actually had a client that just loved behavior. So I hired her to come in and give classes. Next thing I knew, she was teaching more people than I was. So this doesn't have to be a veterinarian's job completely, but it's a nice service for veterinarians. And I think with COVID-19, we're going to see a lot more need for education. How do you build a clientele? And that's one of the ways you build a practice, is education and making the people feel that they've done the right thing and you're doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's very nice, because sometimes people buy the pets and afterwards go to the veterinarian, and then we have to teach them to have that pet. And sometimes I have the good news that sometimes someone comes without any pet to my office, and then I can teach him to buy the correct animal for the house and the way that they live. This is very nice.
What I did is I started going to the pet stores. I'd go to the pet stores and say, you know, you need to have those birds checked out before people completely buy them, and start with education. So pet stores didn't like that. What the people that cooperated the most were the people that breed birds. Mm-hmm. So once you start working real close with a bird breeder, most bird breeders I know have very few babies. Maybe they have a lot of babies, but that means they have a lot of birds. Mm-hmm. So the average bird should have somewhere between 3 and 6 eggs. But that's not the case in most bird breeders' facilities. 1 egg, 2 eggs. And that's something where we can help people tremendously with diet and other issues.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Let's go on. Talking about diet now. What are the things that you consider the wrongest in a bird diet? What things should be completely avoided? And which ones can be completely avoided?
Well, most birds, when you first see them, come in on seeds. So getting them slowly off of seeds, and we've got a whole lot of techniques on our HBD website on how to convert a bird. Little birds like budgies and cockatiels will starve to death when you change a diet if you're not careful. So you have to have a gram scale, you have to weigh them every day. But the little techniques like putting a mirror in the bottom of the cage and sprinkle the food on it, and the little budgie comes over to look in the mirror and it starts moving the food around, and finally will eat it. If you have a bird that's already eating the proper diet, let the new bird see that bird eating. And that, we used to call that a trainer bird. That people would bring birds to my clinic, and I kept a bird or two there just for that purpose, to convert diets. Mm-hmm. And once they get away from the owner worrying about the bird and stuff like that, and owners don't realize how little birds actually eat. They feed this whole big, huge cup of food, but the bird doesn't eat all that in most cases. As far as the best diets, I would like to see people using more and more organic diets, not only because that's what we have, but we have it for a very specific reason. I was a student of Rachel Carson, who wrote the book Silent Spring. That was back in 1959 when I got indoctrinated to, we're doing something really wrong, that the birds are all going to die someday. Well, here we are 60, 70 years later, 50 years later, and she's right. We're losing birds, astronomical numbers in the wild. So by purchasing organic foods, you encourage organic farmers. And organic farmers don't use pesticides, and the new certification for organic is called regenerative. That means that they're putting back into the soil and into the environment more than they're taking out. And that's not the case in most farming. There's a lot of difference between pellets and extrusion that most people don't know. Not everything that has a shape to it is a pellet. A pellet is shaped like a log. It's round, cylindrical, and comes in various thicknesses and various lengths, and that's the end of the story. They can mix pellets with things. They can mix them with seeds and glue them together or whatever they want to do. But that doesn't change the fact that most birds either eat the seeds out of those types of products and let the pellet go. So it's better to convert them to a 100% pellet. If you don't want a pellet, then you have an extruded product. And the difference between pelletization and extrusion is the extrusion is actually a way to bake the food. And that's very important for things like soybean products and other legumes. If the birds eat those raw, that's damaging to them. So if you eat a pellet with soybeans in it, it has to have a special kind of soybean there that was cooked originally before you made the pellet. Whereas with our extruded product, we can use roasted and rolled soybeans, and they get cooked during the extrusion process. And it also makes the diet much more digestible by having it cooked, just like yourself. If you eat a lot of raw things, they may cause digestive disturbances, whereas if you cook them, they don't. So there's probably 5 or 6 excellent extruded diets out there, or Science Diet. I don't know all the other brands right now, but those are the ones that I recommend.
We are so sorry that we don't have Harrison food here in Brazil, because it would be great for us to use them in our pet birds. We're very sorry. There is a question here on the chat. MJ Judson says, I would like to ask Dr. Harrison, when did he bring the idea of formulating his own bird nutrition business? And what tools did he use in terms of reference for nutritional values?
Well, that's interesting. I tried to follow everything that was in Petrak's book and in Lefebvre's books and all the different things, and everybody had the same results. So about 35, 40 years ago, they came out with the first pellets for parrots. And I put my birds on those. I had a lot of trouble getting them to eat it, but I was trying to get the endangered species hyacinth macaw to breed. First of all, they didn't want to eat it. And when I had 3 pair, 6 birds, and we finally got 1 egg, feeding them different pellets that were available in those days. But that was terrible. So I went around to different places. I went to the Puerto Rican parrot to see what they were doing on the endangered parrot there. They weren't having any babies. I went to several other places in South Africa. I went to Brazil. I went to everywhere I could go to find out what was going on. And finally, a man named John Studley came out with a book called Parrot Production. And he was the first person that started to scientifically address hand feeding and incubating parrots. After working with John through different meetings, I finally went to England and spent about a week with him. And I noticed that he got a lot of his vegetables and many of the ingredients for his birds' diets from a local farmer that John had instructed not to use pesticides. They didn't have GMOs in those days, but he didn't want any pesticides on anything. Well, John had amazing breeding results. So I came back and I found a veterinary, an avian nutritionist from the University of Pennsylvania, had just graduated. And we took John Studley's diet and back and forth. And we finally put together, I mean, we had tried monkey biscuits, we had tried cat food, dog food, we tried everything. And when we took Studley's diet and ground it up as an organic mix with a few things that my nutritionist felt needed to be added, we got all 3 pair of the hyacinths to lay eggs. we got the birds to incubate their eggs. We had gone all over the world learning how to incubate eggs. We had 4 or 5 different kinds of incubators. And I wrote a whole long description in one of our books on how do you get a baby bird out of the shell when you take it out of an incubator. Well, you don't have to do that if you feed those birds correctly. So we finally got the parents to hatch an egg, and they fed the baby to weaning. So that was all we wanted to do. Then we've now worked with a gentleman in the Netherlands named Eric van Kooten. I hope we sent you that reference. Eric has been working with our diets for 37 years, or 27 years anyway. And he has the Poicephala, the Ruppel's parrot, has been breeding now for close to 30 years on this diet. And all of his birds breed, all of the eggs hatch, all the birds are raised by the parents. He goes into the nests and touches the babies and gives them a little bit of hand feeding, just so when they come out, they're not freaked out by people. But we know this works. At one time, there was a man from Brazil that came and said he was going to do an organic diet in Brazil, but I don't know what happened.
No, it didn't happen. We don't have an organic diet here. Do you think that the organic is the key point to the pellets?
On the long term, yes. On the short term, I don't think organic makes any difference at all. Maybe 6 months to a year. But we've tested every product we can test, and they all have glyphosate in them. So there's going to be more and more scientific evidence about the danger of glyphosate. And we sent you several references on the recent research on that. And they're saying that COVID-19 is being encouraged and developed because of glyphosate. We've been wondering as professionals for a long time, why do the frogs are disappearing? Why are the insects disappearing? Even grapes and bananas are getting funguses. Why is that? That's called immunosuppression. So when they're immunosuppressed, then these viruses don't have a very big challenge, because the subject gets sick very easily. So that's what's happening right now. In the United States, probably 85% of the people my age, including myself, have heart disease, knee disease, kidney disease, prostate disease, all kinds of things going on. So that's why we're the group that are dying like crazy with this virus. So that's that.
Wow. That's a shame. Well, let me see. You even talk a little bit about that, but can an old bird convert to a pellet diet? Is extremely difficult, or?
I've never had a bird I couldn't convert, but it's not something that you should take lightly. If you follow the bird's weight, you can even try things that the birds, if it's a bird you've had in your home for a long time and it loves pancakes, then grind the pellets into a powder and mix them in with the pancakes. You just have to then gradually use less pancakes and more pellets. But it just takes a little ingenuity and treating the bird as an individual that has a choice. You don't want to starve it to death. You don't want to scold it. You don't want to not do all the nice things that you always do when it's eating what it wants. There's a lot to saying being a good owner has a lot to do with conversion.
And do you think that we have a lot of liver disease because of the consumption of seeds here in Brazil? And do you think that when the animal is with liver disease, can he change the diet to a pellet one, or it would be not the right time to do that?
No, you can do it, but again, you have to put the bird, what's the cause of the liver disease? Is it just fatty seeds? Then start putting in seeds. Most birds don't like safflower seeds. Safflower seeds are very high in fat, like sunflower seeds. And there are other seeds that are lower in fat. You could even use chia or hemp because they're very high in omega-3s. So you can look at the ingredients on a good diet and make it at home. It's just, you know, it's a shame because most people won't do that, but you can do that. And getting them to be converted it's a challenge, but it's not something you can't overcome.
That's right. Let me see here in the chat if there are more questions. What do you think about oral contact, kisses between birds and humans?
What do I think about?
Oral contact, kisses.
I never thought that was a problem, but that might have been because the birds that I had, I was out there eating the food they ate. I was not washing my hands correctly. So probably most of the stuff I had in my mouth was already in the birds. But there are a lot of people that have gum disease or throat disease. So there are people that probably shouldn't feed birds from their face or kiss them or anything like that. And then there are other people think, well, there's psittacosis and there's all these problems. I think you just have to kind of go with your instinct. If you love, that's one of the problems we have with people. They say, oh, I just love my bird. There's a difference between loving a bird and taking good care of it. If you love a creature so much that you're harming it, oh, I just can't change his diet. He gets so mad at me. That's a person that needs to go adopt a puppet or some stuffed animal. They don't need a live bird. They just need something to cuddle and stroke. And that, in fact, that's why one of our bigger clients in the United States recommends these little white doves, because that's what the person's looking for, something they can touch. And they may get a little bit aggressive when they get older, because whenever you constantly pet and stroke a creature, that's a sexual message to the bird. That's a different kind of love. That's sexual love, not romantic love. So teaching a bird that you're stroking it all the time makes it into a breeding bird. So you have to be careful with your affection. Patricia Anderson's chat on training birds says, never touch them except on the top of the head. I've caught her on a couple of videos kissing her birds and had them on her shoulder, but she just loves her birds in a true way. The birds make decisions in her. It's something everybody should look at.
That's nice. What, another question here. What are your opinions regarding toys for birds? Do they pose more harm than good?
No, that's probably the greatest thing we can do for pet birds is enrichment. So and the toys don't have to be expensive. They can be a piece of paper rolled up with a treat in it. And Hildegard Niemann did a behavior thing, and she puts the diet that she wants the birds to eat in her enrichment things that they have to find out where the food is. That just keeps, it's like Todd Drigger says, when you imagine putting a 10-year-old child in a 3 by 3 meter by 5 meter cage and giving them a bowl of food and a bowl of water and a Lego toy. Would that be good enough for that kid to develop into an adult with love and understanding? No. So that's what we do to a bird. We have to get out of that idea of maybe the people I see that have very success with bigger birds, they spend a lot of time with the bird interacting during the day, moving it around to different perches in the house and things like that. So the toys should be safe. They shouldn't have anything like lead or zinc, and that's a common contaminant. If you follow exotic DVM, they're talking about removing zinc particles from birds almost every week. So it's a common problem, at least in the United States, with cheap toys. And you can make toys out of a piece of rope and a piece of tree branch. Find a tree that's the birds are not going to be harmed by. Giving them things like that to chew, and they like to chew, so give them things to chew. And you can just try about anything that you know is safe, but that one bird might like to chew on something wood, one bird might like to chew on something rope. I don't recommend a lot of plastics. Again, that's another oil-based petrochemical that I don't think they need in their life.
here in Brazil, we have some toys that has chains on, and sometimes they get stuck on the beak and make major problems to the birds. That's one thing that we have to have a concern about. And let me see about the food again. Should we give the food freely to the birds, or do you think that we can put in portions all during the day?
That again is a thing you have to work out with your birds. I would say my original recommendations was to give the bird meals. That way, when you put the enrichment things in the cage and they know there's something in there that they want, enrichment is about finding things they want, and they'll work very hard to solve those things. And so I think that's very important. Yeah.
So meals it is.
Yeah.
It's the way. Okay, let me see here in the chat. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to ask Dr. Harrison about quarantining birds. How to do a good quarantine? I hear some divergent opinions about.
They're worried about diseases. Is that why they're quarantining the bird?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's so much new information out there since I basically retired from general practice that I probably don't have the most up-to-date information on that. But some of these diseases, they still don't have a very good diagnostic test. And some people say, oh yeah, this test is great. And the next group says, well, you shouldn't be testing for that disease with this test because you're condemning those birds to death in the case of polyomavirus if you've used the wrong test. So quarantine has to be long enough that you've done all your tests and any shedding could be over with. Introducing new birds to your home, that can be a challenge too after quarantine. So you have to make sure they don't harm each other and that the new birds feel comfortable and they don't bully each other. It's a challenge to have mixed birds, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. Another question here. There are places that orient clients to offer previously boiled water, letting it cool off to room temperature due to the risk of getting giardia from regular tap water. What is your opinion about this? What is the best source of water to offer birds?
Wow. We don't have giardia in the United States, but our water's so full of chlorine and every other thing you can think of. So what I do is I run the water through a reverse osmosis machine. I then run it through a charcoal filter and set it in the sun for about 4 days. And that's the kind of water I personally drink and gave my birds. Mm-hmm. You don't want birds to get water from a plastic device. Dr. Susan Clubb noticed 30 years ago that she was having a lot of problems with coliform bacteria in her parrots. And when she finally did a thorough investigation, the source of those bacteria was the water hose that she was watering her birds with. So the water sits in that plastic hose and it starts to be digested by the bacteria and the yeast and molds that are in the hose. And that became a source of infection for the birds. So I would think any water that's safe for people to drink is good enough for birds.
That's nice. That's nice. What are the most common diseases related to nutrition in the United States?
Well, it's changing. The original ones were obesity, fatty liver disease, vitamin A deficiency, hypocalcemia. That consumed most of our time 30 years ago. Now a lot of those things are under control. But atherosclerosis is by far the newest raging disease. Dr. Scott Eccles just gave a presentation at Phoenix Landing educational seminar a few weeks ago, And he said 80% to 90% of all the birds in the United States, by the time they're 4 to 8 years old, have atherosclerosis. And by the time they're in their late, like say for a small bird, 14 or 15, and a bigger bird, maybe 20, they have severe atherosclerosis. And the reason that we've missed that so much in the past, we don't have a very good diagnostic test. You either have to use CAT scans or MRIs, and Dr. Eccles is now using a dye he injects into the birds in the CAT scan. So that's even another, that's like a $10,000, $20,000 machine. Mm-hmm. So why did this become known then if it was so hard to diagnose? Well, post-mortem, they were finding it 30, 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. But more recently, when they found these MRI diagnostics and CAT scans, they found that birds that had crops that weren't emptying, they thought had proventricular disease. Mm-hmm. It wasn't proventricular disease. The artery coming from the heart to the crop was blocked. So there wasn't a proper blood supply. Birds that had wing problems, they thought it was the wing. Well, it was a lack of blood supply to the wing. The tail started necrosing. The tail feathers all fell out. That bird had atherosclerosis. So it's a lot more common than we thought. Now, how do you treat it? Exercise, diet, and drop the blood pressure. It seems like they have high blood pressure as part of their problem clinically. But that's something that Dr. Bufry in Guelph is working on, and quite a few other people. And we just don't know right now. There are species that seem to be more prone to it, such as the Quaker parrot. But do the Quaker parrots in the wild get it? What do they eat in the wild that they don't get it or do get it? There's a lot to be learned about that. But right now, bird medicine is on the decline. We've seen in the United States, when we first started the Association of Avian Veterinarians, we had about 100 veterinarians. Within 4 or 5 years, we were approaching 4,000. We now have 400 in that organization. So the large corporate practices in the United States, Banfield, and I can't remember all the names of the corporate veterinary practices, they don't do exotics. And therefore, you know, there are over 2,000 corporate practices in the United States alone. So all those people going into those practices they won't even let you do exotics. They may sell them in the pet store that the clinic is in, but they don't want to waste their time on that. They want you putting animals on flea control and tapeworm control and hookworm control and heartworm control, things that are big money makers. And that's kind of a shame for our profession.
Wow. I didn't know that. It's a huge problem. And one of the things that we realized that the diagnosis of atherosclerosis is very difficult because you should do it through a CT scan. Yeah.
You can do it through a CT scan, but I've been talking with some veterinarians from Vienna that are very good with that, and they use ultrasound and different things. And what they find, if you want to actually prove it according to peer-reviewed literature, you have to put the bird under pretty serious anesthesia and run the diagnostic tests for several minutes. And they say that the birds they're seeing, especially a 40-year-old African gray, when they bring the bird in, the owner says, oh, this bird's a little listless. They put the stethoscope on the bird, which I didn't do much stethoscope work on birds because I couldn't hear much of the heart. But what they're listening for is a slight moist sound, not rawls like we'd hear in a mammal, but there's something different, kind of a gurgly sound. When they see that, they suspect atherosclerosis. So they just do a quick gas anesthesia, maybe run 30 seconds of the EKG or ultrasound or whatever they're doing. And they've gotten so good they can make their diagnosis from little points, but you wouldn't be able to publish a paper on that because it takes measurements that take 20, 30 minutes to run those kinds of tests. And then they put them on blood pressure dropping medications, and there are quite a few successful treatments. Those 5 cases that the Austrians presented lived 5 years on the heart medications. So that's pretty good.
Great. Very, very nice. Let me see here. What is the importance of magnification in clinical exam, and what kind of magnification do you use?
Well, I used all different forms. Originally, I started out with just a pair of magnification glasses. And why do you want to use magnification? It's not just for surgery. It's the one I like is this one. And this is made by a company called Surgitel.
Oh, nice.
And the reason you want it is when you look at a feather, for example, can you see the difference in these 2 feathers by just okay. Looking at, let me get this where the camera is. There we go. Yeah. So there's one, and there's the next one. What's the difference in these 2 feathers? So this one has a margin that's still straight. It's not zipping together quite right, but these are 40-year-old feathers. Mm-hmm. But this one is a lot different. So it's all curled up down here. Why is that happening? The little hooklets on the feather that hold the feather together, like when you look at a healthy feather, you can pull the feather apart and you can take your fingernails and zip it back together again. So that means it has the little Velcro hooks are still there. If they're gone, that could be a protein deficiency, that could be a calcium deficiency, a magnesium deficiency. So when you first see a bird, you have a tendency to go with what the owner says. Oh, my bird's coughing. And so you start looking at all the reasons birds cough. Well, you already missed the fact that the bird had bald feet, long nails, flaking beak, plugged nostril, ears full of stuff, the back of the mouth. Everybody seems to look for papillae in the back of the mouth so if they can diagnose vitamin A deficiency. That's so wrong. It's not just vitamin A deficiency that causes these things. So once you slow down and take your time and go over that bird, maybe 5 minutes, 8 minutes of magnification, you start to think about, well, why am I seeing these things? And you do a much better job than when you just look at the bird. When we were doing large animal medicine, they used to call it making a 10-acre diagnosis. You'd drive into the field with the cows and you'd look at them and say, yeah, that one's got this, that one's got that, but you didn't look at the cow. So you have to do a thorough physical exam, and because people feel uncomfortable with birds, you even need to slow down more. And they think, oh, well, I don't know anything about birds. Well, then teach yourself. Find a bird feather somewhere and just study it under magnification, and then do that same thing in the clinic.
One of the things that I said the most when I'm with a client is that we should look to the bird and know what the bird is doing, know what kind of things the bird is used to do, and then afterwards we have to check and examine the bird and take the bird, because sometimes people urge to take the bird and do a physical exam and doesn't even know what is the way that the bird is. Really,
I think that's one of the advantages of the way they're doing veterinary practice in the United States now, is they bring the bird to the clinic and the technician or some other person goes out and brings the bird into the clinic. The veterinarian does the examination. They go out and talk to the owner. They may bring the bird back and do some diagnostic tests or whatever. But when you don't have that owner right there watching everything, and they're really nervous about the money they're spending, the fact their bird may be really sick, and you're not. So I think you do a better job when you don't have the owner in the room.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think so too. Let me see. Do you have? Do you know about thermography? This new technique that they are doing to check the heating pattern of the bird?
Dr. Bob Ness from Illinois is another one that gave an amazing talk to the Phoenix Landing group a few weeks ago, and he presented that thermography presentation. And he says he aims it at a bird, and wherever that red area is, he says that's usually arthritis or inflammation of some kind. He's the only person I know doing that in the United States. There probably are a few others, but that sounds like a logical thing to do to me. But then how much is that camera? He said it's about $10,000. But maybe there's, when people say, oh, I've got to have all this expensive equipment. Yesterday, I ordered an endoscope for $12. It's used for looking in ears, but it's a tiny, tiny little scope. It's about, what is that, 5 centimeters? Right. It's about 1 to 2 millimeters. So you could go down the trachea of a canary with that little scope. It goes to my iPhone, so I can look at my iPhone, and all you gotta do is go on Amazon and look up ear cameras. It's just amazing. It's so cheap. So you don't have to have the latest and greatest equipment if you're just starting, but you do need magnification. You do need an endoscope, because endoscopes revolutionized my practice. I've diagnosed things I couldn't see on X-ray. I was in and out of birds sometimes. That was one of the sad things about when I started. We didn't have a good anesthetic or an immobilizing chemical. So we basically held the birds down and did endoscopy and did a lot of other things that now are considered cruel. But it's amazing how much you can do without creating harm if you can see things. And you can pop in a bird and be in an air sac and check the kidney and the liver and the spleen and the gonads. And I don't know how good it is at diagnosing atherosclerosis, but there's a lot of other things you can see in a 1 to 2 minute evaluation.
Great. If you have to choose only one diagnostic exam to do in a bird, what would it be and why?
Well, I think that's one of our short-term problems. There's no quick thing in bird medicine. I think the gram stain was something that Dr. Helga Gerlich taught me about, tremendous amount of material about that. And we would spend as much time almost on gram stains as we did on physical exams. How many rods are there and the proportions and the colors and all that stuff. Well, now we know that the recent research in the last 5 years is the biome, what's going on inside that bird's bacteria. And there's not just bacteria, but there's viruses and things that probably won't show up on a gram stain. But a normal bird's gram stain is 100% gram-positive bacteria, 70% rods, and 30% cocci. So if you see gram negatives, and you don't have to do a culture, you shouldn't diagnose gram-negative infections with a gram stain, but you do know that if it doesn't get better after some minor things, that you have to do a culture. But I would do that. That's part of every bird I ever saw. I did a gram stain, at least of the stool. And if it had a throat problem, we'd gram stain that. You can gram stain the urophageal glands. It's a very good diagnostic test. So that was my number one. The physical exam is still probably number one. Number two would be a gram stain. X-rays now with these modern digital cassettes and the new diagnostic facilities, it's pretty hard to avoid using radiology. I don't see that the average practice is going to be able to do much bird work without a good quality X-ray machine.
There is another question here about that in the chat that says that from here I am from, vets are lacking a proper equipment to do proper diagnostic. Can I rely really on auscultation, on a physical examination only, and an X-ray?
That's enough to get you to the point. If you don't know anything about birds, you need to find a mentor. And it might be somebody that doesn't think they're a mentor, but you just need to be able to run those cases by somebody else. In fact, right now, the exotic DVM has an amazing lady, Dr. Kathy Johnson Delaney, And she is the best teacher I've ever seen when it comes to birds. And she'll walk you through what you need to do. There's a couple of veterinarians on there that get tired of hearing the same thing. Well, I've got a bird that's limping, and shall I give it a cortisone shot? You know, she walks them through exactly what they need to do. And there's 1,000 references there now. So no matter, if you're going to do birds and you have a mentor you can send them to when the cases get complex, go with the bird. Well, you used to be able to go with the bird to that mentor's facility and see how they do things. I spent time with Ted Lefebvre. I spent time with a lot of veterinarians around the world that treated birds, and that's where I learned more than I did on my own.
That's nice. Let me see here. What should be the diet for birds with renal disease?
What should be the actual diet from the standpoint of a nutritional evaluation for a healthy bird? In the United States, that's handled by a group called AFCO, American Feed Control Officials, and that's a state organization. Every single state in the United States has a representative on AFCO, and they're the ones that set up the standards for what's a dog food, what's an old dog food, and they're now working on things like they got diets for dogs and cats that have kidney disease and urolithiasis. But we don't have anything, even what is the normal diet standard for a bird. So I can't give you a scientific answer of what that should be. Mm-hmm. So we're pretty much at the mercy of what we have.
Yeah. Let me see another one. Dr. Harrison, often we see loss of color in some captive macaws, especially red. Do you use or recommend any color enhancement in the diet?
Well, a good diet will usually bring those colors back. That's oftentimes related to liver disease, other types of malnutrition. Once you get the birds on a good diet, some birds actually benefit for increased levels of beta carotenes. And we've, for the last 20 years, have been using red palm fruit oil. Red palm oil is from the nut, and it's got a lot of omega-6 fats in it. Omega-3s are in the palm fruit oil. The other problem with palm fruit and oil is it's often from a non-sustainable source. And the palm trees are killing much of the native habitats. So you have to get a certified source of organic red palm fruit oil. Those are the best coloring agents I know. I just read an off-the-cuff comment by a veterinarian a couple of days ago that in green birds that turn black, they often have a fungus. I might agree with that they get a fungus in those feathers because the feathers probably turn abnormal color because of the feather follicle isn't getting what it needs to produce what it should. And then the fungus comes in. I can't imagine that the fungus is the primary reason birds have color breaks. But we'll have to debate that between myself and that veterinarian.
Are you used to do cytology when you realize that this has hepatomegaly on x-rays?
Yes, I think that's very important. And that was one of the beauties when I first started practice. The girl that helped me become my technician, she didn't know anything about being a technician, but because I had professors from all over the world coming to my practice, like Helga Gerlach and David Graham and all these fairly famous professors, they would teach her how to do a gram stain, how to do a CBC, how to do a differential, how to do an impression smear. And I didn't know how to do those things. And because she learned how to do them, I never did learn how to do them. But that was an amazing change in my practice when I could see the histo diagnosis of things right there on fresh tissues. So if you can do that and learn it, yeah. But with today's technology, you can do a smear and take a photograph through the new microscopes and send it to an authority to check it out. So yeah, I think that's a great additive.
Mm-hmm. Let me see here. In cases of bumblefoot, in very obese birds, what is do you have to bring down their weight? How much during a week should they lose weight? How many kilograms, grams?
That's another problem that has now been re-evaluated, because most of those birds, we used to say it was just because they were bored and they were sitting around the cage all the day and they just got in the habit of not exercising, not moving around. So they'd say, well, put all different shapes of perches in there, and that never helped. So why do those birds sit like that? Well, then Scott Eccles says it's atherosclerosis. So their heart's not working, they don't feel well, they don't have any energy, so they just sit there and their foot gets a hole punched in it. So that's why it works to put a pad on the foot. So, but it doesn't solve the problem. The problem's the atherosclerosis. So bumblefoot is a real challenge. There's a lot of bumblefoot from other reasons, I'm sure, malnutrition and obesity. Are a beginning thing, but if it's an older bird and is obese, then you pretty much know it has heart disease. And that's not a death sentence. I mean, I had defibrillation problems with my heart 20 years ago. I had to have my heart converted. I had diabetes, and as soon as I changed my diet to organic and quit eating so much high cholesterol foods, I cut most of the animal proteins down to fish and chicken. Here I am, 60 pounds lighter. I still have to stay on some heart medications because I have artificial knees, but it's not a death sentence. So we can figure out what to do with these birds once we get more research.
Nice. Hi from Mexico City. My question is, in raptor nutrition, what do you think of new commercial products that are like a kind of meat-based gelatin?
Out of my league. If it's made from GMO soy, like they're feeding humans in the United States, they call it the Impossible Burger. That's made from soybean nodules on the roots of soybeans, and there's only one kind of soybean that has those nodules in the amount that they can make that hamburger with, and that's a GMO product. So if it's a gel made from human totally, I don't think you're going to be happy with that in the long term. It might work short term, but I don't think you're going to find an easy replacement for meat very soon.
Do you think that is there a possibility that sometime to create a food for raptors, a pellet food for raptors? Do you think that it's possible?
I would think they'd be better off with a frozen food, you know, made from the trimmings of various meats and things like that. I mean, they now have frozen foods for lots of different kinds of animals. Even in the grocery store now, you can buy frozen food for dogs and cats. So I would think that would be the better way to go than synthetic foods.
Okay. Someone is asking here, can you tell me the name of the endoscopy device that you just bought? Greetings from Italy.
All I do is go on Amazon and talk about ear diagnosis. I can look that up and send it to you later. But if you look on endoscopes for ears on Amazon, there's ones from $100 down to $10 or $12, and you just buy one and try it.
That's nice. People, we are arriving now at almost 1 hour with Dr. Greg. So if you have any question else, now it's the time. Let me see. There is another one here. Oh.
Let me just drop in one quick suggestion. We've been working this last year to figure out why some of the bigger birds were having some of the issues they had. And to make a real short point, do not feed Brazil nuts to any parrots, especially if they're on commercial diets, because they have way too much selenium in it. 5 Brazil nuts, and it depends on which Brazil nut, what species, but generally speaking, 5 Brazil nuts have a toxic level if you ate 5 a day for a human. Dr. Ellen Darenfeld, our nutritionist, says that means that a macaw can only eat 1/50th of a Brazil nut a day and have less than a toxic dose. So that's just something new.
Wow, it is completely new. I didn't know that. It's because of the selenium in the meat. Wow.
Yeah, we just posted a new chat on that.
Very interesting. Can you say about vitamin supplements and infectious disease? Do you use this kind of supplements?
Well, when I first started, I would take a syringe and put vitamin B and vitamin A and vitamin C and vitamin D in the same syringe. And then they came out with a thing called Ingicom, and we used a lot of injectable multivitamins in sick birds. I got away from that, and I don't think that there's a real good way to do it orally. They break down in water so fast. I think there are supplements that you could use in some cases, but I just depended on these new diets so much, I don't use any supplements.
Because there are a lot of veterinarians that use this kind of supplements during the mold and during the hatching of the bird and things like that. You don't recommend to use any vitamins?
No.
Okay, that's nice. There are a lot here. What are the doctor preferences regarding enzymes in biochemistry tests?
Out of my league.
Okay. Self-feather picking is seen in many parrots. Any suggestion of that? Of why?
Well, I just had this discussion with one of the Facebook ladies that gives a lot of information on how to handle birds with all kinds of problems. And she sticks a collar on a bird right away. And we're finding that many of these feather picking birds are atherosclerotic birds. Duh. They got pain and you know, one of the symptoms of heart disease in humans and diabetes is a phantom pain in your feet and legs and things like that. So the birds are suffering these same things. So feather picking can be hormonal imbalances. There's a tremendous amount of discussion about that in exotic DVM on what's going on and how do you control those hormones. Most of them are controlled by injections of various gonadotropic hormones. I'm not up to date on that. I think Larry Nemitz is probably the most up to date of anybody I'm aware of on that site. Feather picking is an extremely complex situation, and you just have to keep doing more and more investigation to see what's going on. And if it is atherosclerosis, we need to find a better way to control pain in birds. And we're looking at things like CBD. That was another product that was discussed extensively at the seminar at Phoenix Landing. And the problem with CBD is that there's just no standards. It's like avian diets. There's no standards. So you can produce a CBD with absolutely no CBD in it, and you might be able to make a whole year's profits before somebody decides it's worthless. So finding a good CBD has been a problem in the United States. So I know the veterinarians at that Phoenix Landing thing, 3 out of the 5 don't recommend it because they don't know which one's good. The other 2 have used certain brands, and that's basically what you have to do is go on exotic DVM and see what people are using for pain. But that's a real challenge.
What is your opinion about the use of probiotic supplementation in birds as preventive and after using antibiotics?
I think it's important to do that. Again, we don't have any standards. Europe has probably got the leading products. We import a product that we sell in the United States from Germany. Originally came from France, and they developed it for pigeons. It looks like the species differences. In other words, does a cockatiel have a different probiotic population in its gut than a budgie? I wouldn't be surprised that it would. So in human medicine, one of the ways to repopulate is fecal transplants. And you do a fecal transplant by putting it into the cloaca or the rectum, not through the mouth. And that's one of the problems with probiotics. By the time they get to the colon, they're dead. So if you had, this is probably a controversial thing, but if I had a bird that I knew was healthy as heck and never had any problems, and I'd done fecal transplants to other birds and I didn't cause any problems, having a bird to donate for other birds would be a nice way to do it.
Hi, Dr. Harrison. Have you any suggestion to early diagnostics, treatments, and preventions of visceral gut and fat falcons? We normally detected this problem too late.
What was the problem?
The visceral gut.
One more time.
Visceral gut.
Oh, gout?
Gout, yeah.
Uric acid deposits. There are drugs that are available. Again, we found that once we straightened the diets out and didn't give them excess issues, that we didn't have much gout in pet birds. So I've not worked with a raptor. So again, there's probably better people than me to answer that.
In your experience, what are the best liver and kidney protectors that you would recommend?
Proper diet, but once the liver's in problem, I used, let's see, what did we use? We used lactulose as a carrier. And why do you use lactulose? Because lactulose is a non-digestible sugar that depends on the bacteria in the gut to digest it. When they digest it, they create lactic acid, I believe, and that acid is not friendly to gram-negative bacteria. So that's a good product to use in birds to deliver medicines. Then I use things like SAM-E. I used B-complex products. What did we use? Milk thistle. If you look in one of our books, that we've got a whole bunch of those, and Kathy Johnson Delaney has a tremendous list of different kinds of supplements you can make in your practice for heart disease, liver disease. She's probably got the best information on that.
Let's do the last one. What is your thought about fluid therapy for birds? How many percentage should we give to them when emergency?
Fluid therapy?
Yes.
Well, my brain doesn't remember any of my doses, but if you don't have to give it IV, they do very well with subcutaneous fluids with a little bit of hyaluronidase in it. Some veterinarians found that interosseous administration of fluids in birds that had trouble hitting veins was working very well. I haven't heard anything about that in a long time. Fluids are just as important to a sick bird as they are in any other creature, but again, they're better references than my memory at this moment.
Okay, Dr. Harrison. Would you like to your last considerations? I don't want to take any more of your time.
Oh, I'm sorry it took us.
Do you want to say the last considerations about this live? We are going to end a little bit.
Do I want to what?
Do you want to say anything else with us?
Well, I'm just so honored that you invited me to come. I appreciate everybody hanging around to listen to this after our challenge getting online. Yeah. And I look forward to doing this in the future. Thank you for your time.
Oh, it was a great time here. We would like to thank you very much for this time. I'm sure that everybody loved the time that we had here. It is very nice to hear about a legend on bird medicine like you. So Giovanna is going to end the live now, but we are going to stay online a little bit more, just me and you.
Okay.
Okay, bye-bye, people. Thank you very much for being with us today.